war room was cold at midnight, not the kind of cold that came from open windows or dying fires. It was the kind of cold that settled into stone walls when the man standing in the middle of the room had not moved in over an hour. King Davin Ashvale stood at the long oak table, his hands flat against the surface, his eyes fixed on the iron map spread before him. Carved territories, painted borders, tiny figurines marking troop positions across the eastern reaches. He had not touched a single piece in 40 minutes. His fingers were perfectly still. His jaw was set. His breathing was controlled, the way a man controls his breathing when he is working very hard not to feel something. The fire in the corner had burned down to orange coals. Nobody had come to tend it. The guards outside the door had learned, over 3 years, not to knock unless the kingdom was burning. Corvin entered anyway. He was the only one who could. He had earned that right not through rank alone but through something quieter. A decade of watching this king in every kind of moment, the loud ones and the silent ones, and knowing which kind was more dangerous. He walked in without announcing himself, set a cup of tea on the corner of the map table, and stood back. Davin did not look up. "The border festival in the eastern reaches begins in 4 days, Corvin said. His voice was the same tone he used for weather reports and battle briefings. Flat, clean. Lord Gareth's house has confirmed attendance. So have the Wyndham family, the Colton traders, and roughly half the noble houses who winter in the south. I know, Davin said. The entertainment roster was released this morning. Silence. Corvin picked up a piece of paper from under his arm and set it beside the tea. He did not read from it. He had already memorized the part that mattered. Lyra Kane is headlining the festival. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples were invisible. That was the thing about Davin Ashvale. His surface never broke, not in rooms with other people in them. Not even now, when Corvin could see the muscle in his jaw tighten for exactly 3 seconds before releasing. Which night? Davin asked. All 3 nights. She performs at the main pavilion. They are calling her the finest traveling performer in the Eastern and Northern Territories combined. Corvin paused. The announcement used the words remarkable and unforgettable. Davin's eyes moved to the Iron Wolf figurine at the center of the map. It was the piece he used to mark the position of the Silver Court itself. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked back at the map's eastern border, where a small red flag marked the festival grounds. 3 years. That was how long it had been since Lyra Kane had walked out of the Silver Court with nothing but the clothes on her back and the pride she had spent a lifetime building. She had not looked back. He knew because he had watched from the high window of this very room, his hand on the cold glass, watching until she disappeared beyond the outer gate and the road bent and there was nothing left to watch. He had made himself stop looking. He had not, in 3 years, managed to make himself stop. Cancel my appointments for the 5th through the 8th, he said. Corvin did not blink. He had his own expression for moments like this, a stillness that matched the king's, the kind that gave nothing away while absorbing everything. All of them, Your Majesty? All of them. Lord Pemberton has been waiting 3 weeks for the trade route discussion. Then he can wait a 4th. Corvin picked up his piece of paper. He tucked it back under his arm. He did not ask the obvious question, which was what Davin planned to do with 4 cleared days at the exact time Lyra Kane was performing 90 miles east. He did not ask because some questions, asked aloud, became things that could not be taken back. I will send no word ahead, Davin said, before Corvin could leave. To anyone, no advance riders, no announcements. Understood. And I want a small group, 6 riders, nobody from the inner court. Corvin nodded. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at the king, who had returned to staring at the Iron Wolf figurine. The tea was getting cold. She was very good, Corvin said quietly, even 3 years ago. Davin said nothing. Corvin walked out and pulled the door shut. In the corridor, he stood for a moment with his back against the wall, looking at the ceiling. He had known this moment was coming. He had been waiting for it, the way you wait for a storm you can smell on the wind but cannot yet see. The question was never whether Davin would go. The question was what would happen when he got there. Davin Ashvale was a man who had ruled the Silver Court since the age of 22. He had built alliances that other kings only dreamed about. He had won a border war in 8 months that everyone expected to last 4 years. He had walked into rooms full of men twice his age and spoken with a certainty that made those men set down their weapons. He was also a man who had spent 3 years moving campaign pieces on a map he did not need to move, at midnight, alone, when everyone else in the court had long since gone to bed. Corvin had watched him do it, night after night, the pieces moving east, then resetting, the same territory, the same red flag on the same border. It was not strategy. It never had been. Back inside the war room, Davin finally picked up the tea. It was almost cold. He drank it anyway. He set the cup down and looked at the map one more time. At the eastern border, at the small red flag that marked a place he had told himself, 100 separate times, that he did not think about. He thought about it constantly. He turned away from the table and walked to the window. The palace grounds below were dark and quiet. The outer gate was closed. The road that ran beyond it disappeared into the tree line, heading east. He pressed one hand against the cold glass. 3 years ago, he had made a choice in less than 1 hour. He had been given a letter, or what was presented to him as a letter, and a lord's firm testimony, and a court full of people who needed to see their king act decisively. He had acted. He had signed the banishment order before the ink on the supposed evidence was dry. He had told himself it was the right thing to do. He had told himself a king could not afford doubt. He had told himself a lot of things in the weeks that followed, standing at this same window, watching the same road. None of those things had made the tight feeling in his chest loosen. He was very good at being a king. He was considerably less good at being the version of himself that had once made Lyra Kane laugh in the middle of a crowded reception by whispering something terrible about the ambassador's hat. That version of himself felt like someone he had locked in a room and stopped visiting. He stepped back from the window. He had 4 days before the festival began. He had matters to handle. Real ones. Not Pemberton's trade route, but the kind that could not be delayed even by a king trying to outrun his own decisions. He would spend 2 days on them. He would sleep. He would eat. He would go through the motions of being the kind of person who did not spend his nights staring at campaign maps. And then he would ride east. He told himself it was not about her. He told himself a king's interest in a major border festival was completely reasonable. He told himself he simply needed to see the Eastern Reaches situation for himself, that it had been too long since he had left the Silver Court, that Corvin had been after him for months to make the journey. He told himself all of this while walking back to the table and picking up the Iron Wolf figurine and setting it down, very deliberately, 1 inch to the right of where it had been, closer to the east. He looked at it for a long moment, then he set it back. He was still the king. There were rules about what kings did, and the rules were there for good reason, and he had built his entire reign on the understanding that a man who let his personal feelings move pieces on a map would eventually lose the whole board. He knew all of this. He believed all of this. He turned off the last lamp and walked out. In the morning, he reassigned 3 more appointments. By afternoon, Corvin had arranged the horses, the 6 riders, and the travel provisions. Nobody asked why the king was making an unannounced trip to a border festival on 4 days' notice. Nobody in the Silver Court asked questions like that. They had learned, slowly, that the questions Davin Ashvale did not invite were not meant to be asked. There was a woman in the outer court named Lady Isolde, who had been angling for the king's attention for the better part of a year. She heard about the festival trip from her maid, who heard it from a stable hand, and she spent an entire afternoon composing a note suggesting she accompany the royal party, since her own family had business in the east. She sent the note. She received, in return, 3 words in Corvin's handwriting. The king declines. She stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then she set the note aside and went back to her embroidery, and tried not to think about the fact that the king had not smiled at anyone in 3 years. Not a real smile. The political ones, the slight upward movement he used in court when things went well, those he performed perfectly. But the real one, she had only ever seen it described by older courtiers who remembered him before, when there had been a woman in the Silver Court who could apparently make him forget himself entirely. Nobody said her name in the court anymore, not to the king, not near the king. It was an unspoken understanding that had developed organically over 3 years, the way these things do in royal households, not as an order but as a shared recognition that some subjects were walls and walls were not for walking through. Corvin said her name, occasionally, when it was necessary, and he watched the king's face each time with the careful attention of a man who understood that what happened on a person's face in the first half-second before they could control it was the truest thing about them. He had learned over 3 years what Davin's face did in that half-second. It was not the expression of a man who had moved on. On the morning of the 4th day, Davin came down to the courtyard while the horses were being saddled. He wore plain riding clothes, no insignia, no silver thread, nothing that announced him as anything more than a well-built man in good boots. He checked his own horse's girth, which he always did, trusting no one entirely with that particular task. He swung up into the saddle with the ease of someone who had been riding since before he could read. He looked east. The road ran straight for the first mile, then bent into the tree line. Beyond the trees, beyond a day's ride, was the Eastern Reaches, and beyond that, the festival grounds. And on the festival grounds, every night for 3 nights, a pavilion lit with fire and hanging lanterns, and in that pavilion, moving through firelight, performing for everyone who was not him. "Ready when you are, Your Majesty," Corvin said, from his left. Davin looked at the road. "Send no word ahead," he said again. "I remember." And Corvin, "Yes. If anyone asks what the king is doing at a border festival, I'll tell them you have a deep personal interest in the eastern trade routes." Davin looked at him for a moment. Corvin's expression was perfectly composed, which meant he was working hard to keep it that way. "Good," Davin said. He touched his heels to the horse and rode out of the courtyard without looking back. The road east was long. The morning was gray and cold, the trees bare on either side, the ground still soft from the previous week's rain. The 6 riders kept pace behind him. Corvin rode beside him and said nothing for the first 2 hours, which was one of the things Davin valued most about him. By midday, the trees had thinned. The eastern reaches began to open up, wider skies, lower hills, the smell of river water in the air. Villages appeared at longer intervals, and the roads connecting them were better maintained here, where trade moved more freely. People stood in doorways and watched the small party ride past, uncertain whether to bow, unable to tell from plain clothes, and no announcement whether the man at the front was worth bowing to. Davin rode through all of it without stopping. He ate in the saddle. He drank from his own flask. He spoke when Corvin raised something that required a response and was silent the rest of the time. He was thinking about the last time he had seen her face. Not angry. That was the thing that had stayed with him for 3 years. The detail he could not organize into something useful. He had expected anger. He had almost needed anger. It would have made the decision feel more solid, more right, more like something a king had to do rather than something a man had done in a panicked hour. But she had not been angry. She had looked at him across the length of the court chamber with an expression he had spent 3 years trying to name, and still could not. Like she was seeing something she had suspected for a long time and had finally been given proof of. Like he had confirmed something. That was the worst part. That expression had sat behind his ribs like a splinter ever since, too small to operate on, too persistent to ignore. He rode faster. By evening, the festival grounds were visible on the horizon. Strings of lights, the sound of music carrying across the flat valley below, the smell of wood smoke and roasting food. The pavilion was enormous. Even from a distance he could see the crowd gathered around it, hundreds of people, their voices blending into a single warm sound. He stopped his horse on the rise above the valley and looked down at it. Somewhere in that crowd, or backstage behind that pavilion, or standing at a mirror touching paint to her face and straightening her shoulders the way she always had before a performance. "We should find the inn before dark," Corvin said from behind him. "I've arranged rooms under a different name." "Which name?" "Captain Wren. It is a boring name. Nobody will look twice." Davin looked at the festival lights for another moment. Then he turned his horse toward the town road. "Boring is fine," he said. They rode down. The inn was warm, and the food was plain, and the innkeeper was a sturdy woman, named Mrs. Hollis, who seemed entirely unimpressed by Davin's height and bearing, which was so rare that it almost made him smile. Almost. He ate. He sat by the fire in the inn's common room. Around him, travelers discussed the festival with the easy excitement of people who had been looking forward to this for months. He heard her name 3 times in 1 hour without needing to search for it. "Lyra Kane. She's performing all 3 nights. My daughter has seen her twice already in the Northern Circuit. She says there's nobody quite like her. They say she turned down a permanent position at the Alderton House just to keep traveling. Can you imagine?" He could. He could imagine it precisely, because he knew her. He knew what that refusal cost her, and what it meant, and exactly why she had made it. She had never been someone who stayed in one place because it was comfortable. She had always moved toward the thing that was harder, the thing that asked more of her, the thing that might fail. He had once loved that about her. He still did. He stared at the fire for a long time after the inn quieted down, after the other travelers had gone to their rooms, after Corvin had given him a look that said goodnight without saying a word. He sat alone by the dying fire, listening to the distant music from the festival grounds, and he told himself again that he was here for political reasons, for the trade routes, for the Eastern relationships that needed the king's personal attention. He told himself this for almost an hour. Then he went to bed and stared at the ceiling, and did not sleep until well past midnight. The mirror backstage was cracked in the lower left corner. Lyra Kane had noticed it the moment she walked in and had decided, within 30 seconds, that she liked it better that way. A perfect mirror was for people who needed reassurance. A cracked one just told you what was actually there. She sat in front of it now, pressing a thin line of coal along her lash line with the practiced ease of someone who had done this in worse conditions than these. Worse light, worse mirrors, no mirror at all. Once, behind a market stall in a rainstorm, using the reflection from a tin pot. The backstage area of the festival pavilion was generous by the standards she had grown used to. There was a real chair. There were hooks on the wall for costumes. There was a small brazier in the corner pushing out actual heat. She had slept in barns that offered less. Around her, the troupe moved with the particular energy of pre-performance, focused, slightly manic, deeply comfortable with each other in the way that only comes from months of close travel and shared difficulty. Petra, the troupe's lead musician, was arguing quietly with the drummer, Owen, about the tempo of the opening number. Their argument had been going on in various forms for 6 weeks, and would probably not be resolved before this performance or any other, but they would play it perfectly tonight regardless, the way they always did. The argument was not about the tempo. It was about something else that neither of them had said yet. Lyra noticed these things. She always had. 2 more pins, said Clara, appearing behind her with a handful of hairpins and the look of someone who took their job very seriously. Clara was the youngest member of the troupe, 17 and terrifyingly competent, and she had appointed herself Lyra's dresser 6 months ago without being asked, and had not been dismissed because she was also, genuinely, very good at hair. The left side keeps slipping, Lyra said. That's because you keep touching it when you're thinking. I don't touch my hair when I'm thinking. Clara met her eyes in the cracked mirror. You're touching it right now. Lyra dropped her hand. Clara pinned the left side with 3 efficient movements and stepped back. Better, Clara said. Beyond the curtain, the crowd was growing. Lyra could hear it, the specific sound of a large group of people settling in. The layers of conversation and laughter and anticipation building into something that had texture, almost warmth. She had learned to feel crowds before she could see them. 3 years on the circuit had given her that. You learned to read the energy through the walls, to know before you walked out whether a crowd was warm or cold, whether they wanted to be moved or just entertained, whether they had come because they truly wanted to be there or because someone had brought them and they were making the best of it. Tonight's crowd was warm, genuinely warm. She felt it in the small of her back, that particular hum she had spent years learning to name. She had her own name for it now. She called it the current. It ran from the base of her spine to the back of her skull when a crowd was really listening. It had taken her a long time to trust it. The first year on the circuit, she had been so busy managing her own fear that she could barely feel anything except the terror and determination, and the endless calculations about whether she was good enough. She was good enough. She knew that now. It had taken losing everything to find that out. 5 minutes, said Ben, appearing in the doorway. Ben was the troupe manager, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a kind face, and the organizational capacity of a military general. He had found Lyra at her lowest point, the end of her first terrible month, sleeping in a borrowed room, performing at a second-rate tavern for an audience of 12 who were mostly interested in the ale, and had offered her a place in the troupe with a handshake and a flat weekly wage that seemed impossibly generous at the time. Later she had found out that Ben offered that same flat wage to everyone he brought in, regardless of their talent level, because he believed that security produced better performances than desperation. He had been right. He had also, quietly, raised her wage 6 times in 2 years, each time without her asking, which she knew because she had seen the troupe's finances and done the arithmetic. She had once tried to thank him for it. He had looked confused and changed the subject. She stood up from the mirror. Clara handed her the outer layer of her costume, deep green, the color she had chosen for this festival because it was a night color, a moving color, the color of pine trees in firelight. She slipped it on. She checked her hands. Her wrists had been bare for the past hour, waiting. She reached for the gold earrings on the small table beside the mirror. They were not exceptional earrings. They did not look like much. A simple oval shape, warm-toned gold, the kind of thing you might buy from a market jeweler without much ceremony. But she had bought them on a Tuesday afternoon in a small town 3 months into her first circuit year, with her own money, the first real surplus she had earned by her own skill. She had stood at that market stall for 10 minutes, the earrings in her palm, doing the arithmetic about what else the money could go toward. She had bought them anyway. Not because she needed earrings. She had needed them specifically, that specific day, because she needed something solid and hers to hold. Something that said, this is proof, you did this. This small golden thing is yours, because you earned it. She put them in and turned to the mirror. Clara made a satisfied sound. Petra knocked twice on the doorframe and said, 1 minute, without stopping. Owen hit a single drum note from somewhere in the wings, testing, and the sound rolled out toward the crowd, and the crowd responded. A slight shift, a settling in, a readying. Lyra rolled her shoulders. She breathed in. She let it out slowly. She did not think about the silver court. She was very good at not thinking about the silver court. She had built, over 3 years, a careful architecture inside herself. A series of rooms she kept closed. The room with the heavy oak doors where the court used to hold receptions. The room with the high window where she used to stand on cold mornings and look at the training yard below. The room where she had first seen him, 3 years before the banishment, at a formal dinner she had attended as a guest of Lady Holbrook, and he had been across the room, and something in the air between them had shifted without either of them saying a word. She did not open those rooms. She kept them shut. What she had instead was this: the smell of pine resin and stage dust, the sound of Petra arguing about tempo, Clara's efficient hands pinning her hair, the hum at the base of her spine that said the crowd was ready, the gold earrings in her ears that said she had survived. She walked toward the curtain. "Lyra," said Clara from behind her. She turned. Clara was holding out a small cup of water. "You always forget." Lyra took the water. She drank it. She handed the cup back. "What would I do without you?" she said. Not a question. Clara was used to that. "Perform dehydrated," Clara said, already turning to sort the costume rack. Lyra laughed. It was a real laugh, quick and unguarded, and she felt it in her shoulders, the loosening of the thing that had been held tight all afternoon. She did not always know, going into a performance, whether the laughter was still in her. 3 years on the road, most of it in motion, a lot of it alone, with her own thoughts at 3 in the morning in the back of a wagon, could press a person flat. She had felt flat sometimes. She had felt the hollow version of herself performing, the one that knew the steps and hit the marks and smiled at the right moments but felt, underneath, like a painting of a person, rather than the actual person. Those nights scared her. Not because she was bad, she was never bad, she knew her craft too well for that, but because she was afraid the hollow feeling might one day stop being temporary, that she might press one hand to her chest one night and find nothing there but the performance itself. It had not happened yet. She was careful about it. She took care of herself the way Ben took care of his troupe, seriously, practically, without sentimentality. She slept when she could. She ate before she was hungry. She kept the gold earrings in a locked box and took them out before every show. She argued with Petra about tempo and told Owen his drums were too loud and let Clara pin her hair and drank the water she always forgot. These things were hers. They were not much. They were enough. She stepped through the curtain. The crowd was larger than she had expected. The pavilion was packed, torchlight spilling gold over hundreds of faces turned toward the stage. She could see the front rows clearly. Families, couples, young men leaning forward with their elbows on their knees, women in their festival clothes. The back of the pavilion was standing room, bodies pressed comfortably close, voices still murmuring. She found her mark. Petra struck the opening note, and Lyra moved. There was a version of performing that was about execution, hitting the steps, reaching the marks, sustaining the lines. She had started there, in the beginning, in the taverns and market squares where being technically correct was the goal because technically correct meant she would be hired again. That was not what she did now. What she did now was something harder to describe and something the audiences, without being able to name it, always felt. She moved as if the music were a conversation she was having, rather than a track she was following. She brought herself into it, not performing emotion but actually having it, in the moment, in front of everyone. She had learned this by accident, one night in a small hall when she had been too tired and too sad to manage the distance she usually kept, and had simply let what she was feeling come through. And afterward 3 strangers had come backstage to find her and tell her it was the most moving thing they had ever seen. She had thought about that for a long time. After that she had made a different choice about what performance meant. It was not armor. It was not the opposite of vulnerability. It was the most precise and controlled way of being fully present that she had ever found. Tonight she was fully present. The crowd moved with her. She could feel it. The collective breath, the leaning in, the laughter where she wanted laughter, the quiet where she needed quiet. By the middle of the second number she could hear the change in the room, the settling that happened when a crowd stopped being an audience and started being something else. Part of it, in it. She had a word for that too, one she kept to herself. Together. She danced through the third number, the fourth. Between numbers she moved through the front section, close to the audience, close enough to touch hands and catch eyes, and make the distance between performer and crowd feel like something that could be crossed. She had learned this on the circuit too. The power of proximity, of letting people feel seen rather than simply watching. A man in the front row pressed a coin into her palm as she passed. He was older, gray-haired, the kind of face that had lived a full life and was glad of it. She smiled at him, full, real, the unguarded kind. He beamed back like the sun coming out. She kept moving. The back of the pavilion was darker. The crowd thinned slightly toward the entrance, where the standing audience had more room. She did not look toward the back while performing. It was a rule she kept, not from nervousness but from focus. The front rows were where the connection lived. The back was where people drifted in and out. But something happened at the end of the fourth number. A shift. A slight change in the sound of the room. The way the air moved differently when a large person entered a space, and the people near them adjusted without thinking. She had felt that particular shift before, once. She kept dancing. She did not look toward the back. She kept her eyes on the front rows and her body in the music and her face in the expression it needed to be, and she thought about absolutely nothing, except the steps and the breath and the beat and the hum at the base of her spine. The hum that had changed. She could feel it. She had spent 3 years building a life that required her to feel nothing that she had not chosen to feel. She had gotten very good at it. She was not going to undo that work in the middle of a performance in a festival pavilion. She finished the number. She bowed. The crowd applauded. Long, full, genuine. She could hear the warmth in it. She did not look at the back of the pavilion. She straightened from the bow and turned back to the stage for the next number. Petra was already on the opening notes. Clara was waiting in the wings with a quick adjustment to the outer layer of the costume. She did not look, but she knew. The knowing sat in her chest and did not move. 3 years, she thought. 3 years of distance and work and those gold earrings in the barn, and the 11 failed auditions and the wagon at 3 in the morning. 3 years of building a self that did not need anyone's permission or presence. She stepped into the next number. If he was there, he could watch. She would give him nothing except what she gave everyone else. The best she had, every time, for no one person, and for everyone equally. That was the other thing she had built in 3 years, the thing she was proudest of. She did not perform for anyone's approval anymore. Not his. Not a crowd's, exactly. She performed because this was her life, and she had made it, and it was good, and it was hers. The music moved. She moved with it. Around her, the pavilion was fully alive. And in the back, near the entrance, the air stayed different. She could feel the weight of it the way you feel weather before it arrives. She did not turn. She did not give herself that. She danced instead, the way she had always danced, like it was the only real thing, like no one was watching, even though someone was. He had told himself he was prepared. He was not prepared. Davin stood near the back of the pavilion, slightly apart from the crowd, his plain riding coat drawn close, his face in the shadow between 2 torches. Corvin was 6 feet to his left. The other riders were positioned at the entrance. Nobody in the crowd knew him. He had made sure of that. No insignia, no silver, nothing that would draw an eye. He was just a tall man in plain clothes who had arrived late and stayed near the back and kept very still. The keeping very still was important right now. Because the alternative was movement, and movement would give something away, and there were things that could not be given away in public. She was on the stage. He had known she would be on the stage. He had known this since Corvin told him the name on the entertainment roster. He had known it through 4 days of riding, and 1 sleepless night at an inn, and every hour since. He had known, intellectually, with the complete certainty of a man who had thought about almost nothing else for 4 days, that she would be here, and she would be performing, and he would see her. Knowing and seeing were not the same thing. She was moving through the 3rd number, and the torchlight was on her, and the pavilion was full of people who were watching her, and she was giving them everything. Not the careful version, not the performance at a distance version, but the real one, the whole one, the kind he had only ever seen in private moments before and had not expected to see here, in public, in front of hundreds of strangers who had simply bought tickets to a festival and stumbled into something they would probably describe for years. He pressed the heel of his hand flat against his thigh, a small movement. Nobody noticed. 3 years had not made her smaller. That was the first wrong thing he had assumed. That time and distance and difficulty would sand something down, reduce it to a manageable version of what it had been. He had been wrong. She was bigger, not in a simple physical sense, but in the way a fire is bigger when it has had fuel. She had been given a hard 3 years, and she had apparently used every minute of them. The crowd was full of people leaning toward her, not consciously. They could not help it. She pulled attention the way heat pulls cold, not with effort but by existing in a space and being warmer than everything around her. He watched a woman in the 3rd row clasp her friend's arm without looking away from the stage. He watched a young man in the 2nd row sit forward until he was almost off his chair. He watched all of this from the back of the pavilion and kept very still and said nothing. Between numbers, she moved through the front section. He watched the distance between her and the audience collapse. She made it collapse, deliberately, effortlessly, the way she had always moved through a room, as though the concept of too close did not apply to her the way it applied to other people. She paused at the front row. An older man pressed a coin into her hand and she smiled at him. Davin knew that smile. He had last seen it directed at himself, a long time ago, in a different life, in a hallway off the main reception room where they had both escaped a party that was going on too long. She had been saying something about the ambassador's hat, and he had been laughing properly for the first time in months. He had not laughed properly since. He was not thinking about that right now. He was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the crowd and the eastern trade routes and the political significance of a border festival to the Silver Court's territorial relationships in this region. His left hand found the cup of wine he had accepted from a passing server 10 minutes ago and had not touched since. He held it. He did not drink from it. She moved back toward the stage for the next number. The musician, a woman with dark red hair who played like she was in an argument with the instrument, struck the opening notes and the crowd settled again and Lyra moved. Davin's grip on the wine cup tightened. He felt it, the slow, controlled tightening, and forced his hand to loosen. He was aware of Corvin 6 feet to his left, with the same awareness he always had of his beta in a tense situation, a peripheral presence, a check on his own behavior. Corvin was not looking at him. He was watching the crowd, which was his job, and he was doing it very professionally. Davin turned his attention back to the stage. She had not seen him. He was almost certain of it. He was in the shadow, at the back, in plain clothes, in a crowd of hundreds. There was no reason for her eyes to find him. He told himself this. He told himself he could stand here for the duration of the performance, observe and leave. He had done more difficult things than this. He had stood in rooms where the men across the table from him were quietly planning his death, and he had negotiated with them for 4 hours without showing anything on his face. He could stand in the back of a pavilion. The fourth number was something he did not know, one of hers, he thought, or something from the circuit that hadn't reached the Silver Court. It had a particular quality. It started with a kind of playful energy, and then shifted, slowly, into something that ached, and then shifted again into something fierce and clean, and the crowd followed every turn without being told to. He had stopped pretending to watch for political reasons. He was just watching her. He was watching the way she moved her hands, the specific small gesture at the end of a turn that he had seen her make 100 times, privately, when she was dancing alone and didn't know he was in the doorway watching. He was watching the way she breathed between phrases. He was watching the line of her shoulders when she was in the fierce part of the number, that particular set that said she was drawing on something real, something that actually mattered, and using it as fuel. The expression on her face in the fierce part was an expression he recognized. He had seen it before. Not in dancing, in an argument, once, a real one, the only really significant argument they had ever had, when she had looked at him with that expression and told him with perfect controlled clarity that he was brilliant at ruling a kingdom, and significantly less brilliant at trusting anyone who loved him. He had dismissed that, at the time. He had told himself she was being unfair, that she didn't understand the demands of his position, that trust was a different thing for kings than it was for other people. He had spent 3 years understanding how right she had been. The fourth number ended. The crowd applauded. Lyra bowed. She straightened. And she looked toward the back of the pavilion. Not for long. It was a single second. The sweep of eyes across a room. The kind a performer did automatically, taking in the full scope of the crowd. A professional habit, nothing deliberate about it. But it landed. He saw the moment it landed, that fraction of a second before the professional mask reset. It lasted less than a heartbeat. Then she was turning back to the stage, her face composed, her back straight, her chin level. He saw it. It was enough. He raised the wine cup to his lips and discovered it had cracked along the stem. A clean fracture, not dramatic, the kind you wouldn't notice until the cup gave way slightly between the fingers. He set it down on the wooden rail beside him before anyone could see. He looked at his hand. There was no damage. He turned his attention very deliberately to the crowd around him, to the eastern trade route significance of the festival, to the political relationships being built in this room between noble houses. He stayed for the rest of the performance. He did not move toward the front. He did not try to catch her eye again. He stood at the back in the shadow between 2 torches and watched the rest of it with the contained attention of someone who had accepted, somewhere in the middle of the fourth number, that there was no version of this that was manageable. There had never been a manageable version of this. He had simply told himself there was for 3 years. The performance ended to an ovation that lasted longer than anything Davin had seen at the Silver Court in recent memory. People were on their feet. The sound was thick and physical and warm. He watched her on the stage, accepting it, not with the false modesty he saw from court performers that studied deflection of applause, but with a simple, direct recognition. She looked at the crowd and received what they were giving her, and gave them back a clear-eyed acknowledgement that said, "I know what we just did together." Then she walked off the stage. The crowd began to disperse slowly, still talking, still charged. Corvin appeared beside him. "Your Majesty." "The inn," Davin said. "Of course." They walked toward the pavilion entrance. The crowd moved around them, warm and loud, people stepping aside for the tall man in the plain coat without quite knowing why they were stepping aside. They were outside in the cold air before Corvin spoke again. "She's very good," he said. His tone was entirely neutral. "Yes," Davin said. "Better than she was." "Which is saying something." Davin said nothing. He walked. The festival grounds were spread out around them. Other stages, food stalls, fire pits where people gathered with drinks and conversation. "The backstage entrance is on the north side of the pavilion," Corvin said. "I noticed on the way in." Davin stopped walking. He turned and looked at Corvin, who was looking at the festival grounds with the expression he used when he was being deliberately helpful, in a way he would deny being deliberate about. "I did not ask," Davin said. "I know," Corvin said. "I simply noticed." They stood there in the cold for a moment. "She won't want to see me," Davin said. It was the first time in 3 years he had said anything close to that out loud. The words felt strange in his mouth, too direct, too specific, too much like the kind of thing that could not be said by a man who had spent 3 years insisting, to himself and everyone around him, that the subject was closed. Corvin kept looking at the festival grounds. "No," he said honestly, "she probably won't." Then going to the backstage entrance would be a bad idea. "Yes. Possibly the worst idea you've had all year." "Yes." Another silence. Somewhere behind them, the pavilion crowd was still murmuring, still wrapped in the warmth of the performance. One of the fire pits threw orange light across the ground between them. "The inn is that way," Corvin said, pointing left. "I know which way the inn is." "I was being helpful." Davin looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the pavilion. He could see the north side from here, the plain wooden door in the side wall, a lantern hanging above it, a boy of about 12 sitting outside it on a crate, probably a runner for the performers inside. He turned left. He walked toward the inn with Corvin 2 steps behind him, and he did not look back at the north door of the pavilion, and he did not think about the expression on her face when her eyes had found the back of the pavilion, and he did not think about the crack in the wine cup, or the way she had set her jaw when she turned back to the stage and kept going. He thought about those things for the entire walk back to the inn. He thought about them while he ate a cold meal that Mrs. Hollis left out for the late returners. He thought about them sitting by the fire in the now empty common room. He thought about them, finally, lying on his back in the small inn room with its low ceiling, and its single window showing a square of dark sky, and he kept thinking about them until sometime in the early hours of the morning, when exhaustion took over, and he finally slept. He dreamed about the hallway off the main reception room, about the ambassador's hat, about a real laugh. He woke up at dawn with the feeling that he had lost something he had only recently realized he was still carrying. The festival had 2 more nights. She saw him between the 3rd and 4th number. Not before. She had been honest with herself about this later, standing at the river's edge after the show, replaying the timeline with the same precision she applied to everything that mattered. She had not seen him when she first walked out. She had not seen him during the 2nd number. She had been fully in the performance, which was the truth, and she had kept it that way through the first 3 numbers by doing the things she was best at, being exactly where she was, in that room, with those people, in that moment. Then, in the brief pause between numbers 3 and 4, while Petra was settling into the opening notes and Lyra was moving back from the front rows and the crowd was breathing that particular collective breath that said they were ready for the next thing, she had moved her eyes across the room, a full sweep, back to front, side to side, automatic. She saw him. He was in the shadow between 2 torches at the back of the pavilion, standing very still, holding a wine cup he clearly had not been drinking from, and even in the dimness and the distance she knew the shape of him, the way she would have known her own name, spoken by a stranger. The knowing lasted less than 2 seconds. The performance lasted another 40 minutes. She went back into the performance. That was not the difficult part. The difficult part, the one she had not fully anticipated, was that she went back into it harder, Not worse, harder. She pulled something up from a place she did not usually visit during shows. The place where the last 3 years lived in their compressed and careful form, and she used it. The way a fire uses wood. The way a flood uses the low ground. She gave the crowd the fiercer version of herself because she had something to be fierce about, because she was not going to stand in front of that pavilion and be reduced, not even internally, not even in a way no one could see. She had not performed for anyone's approval in a long time. She was not going to start tonight. The crowd felt the shift. They always did. She could feel them lean in harder in the fourth number, feel the quality of attention change from warm to something more like riveted, and she used that too. She let it backfeed into her. This was the circuit's great lesson. The relationship between a performer and a crowd was not a transaction. It was more like a conversation, a living thing, something that changed and grew in the exchange. The crowd was with her, fully, the way they had not been quite as fully in the first 3 numbers, which had already been excellent. She thought about that, later, about what it meant that she had given her best performance of the entire festival specifically in the moment she was most furious and most determined to prove something. She thought about it at the river's edge after the show, her feet cold in the grass, the festival sounds distant behind her. She had walked directly here from backstage, not running, not fleeing. She had walked with complete composure through the congratulations, Ben's broad hand on her shoulder, Clara's excited chatter about the crowd response, Petra's nodded acknowledgement, which from Petra was the equivalent of a standing ovation. She had smiled at all of them. She had said what needed to be said. She had changed out of the stage costume and back into her regular clothes. She had put the gold earrings back in their box and the box in her bag. She had walked out of the backstage area through the side door that led to the festival's edge, and then past the festival's edge, and then down the grassy slope to the narrow river that ran along the eastern side of the grounds. Here, finally, she sat down. The river was shallow and very clear and made no particular comment about anything. She looked at it for a while. She had prepared for a lot of things in 3 years. She had prepared for difficulty and loneliness and failure, and the specific kind of grinding exhaustion that came from living entirely by your own effort. She had prepared for bad audiences, and difficult venues and illness on the road, and the particular sadness of waking up in a different town every week, and not being sure, in the first seconds of consciousness, where you were. She had not prepared for this. She had not prepared for the way seeing him would feel, not like being hit, but like something much quieter, and therefore much worse. Like a door she thought she had locked, swinging open without a key. She pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes. She stayed like that for a moment. Then she dropped her hands and looked at the river. She was not going to cry. She had done her crying, quietly, practically, in a barn in the first month, in a rented room in the 3rd month, and then twice more in the 2nd year, both times alone, both times with the same privacy she gave everything difficult in her life. She did not cry where anyone could see her. She did not cry here. What she felt was not grief. It was something harder to name and harder to put away. It was the particular feeling of seeing something you had worked very hard to walk away from, and finding that the walking away had been real, and the work had been real, and you were genuinely, truly, a different person now, and that none of that made the sight of it hurt any less. Both things were true. She held them both. She had made herself into something here, out on the road, not a reaction to what she had lost, not a recovery, not a story about surviving something. Just herself, fully herself, the version that had always been in there but had needed the road and the difficulty and the 11 failed auditions and the cold mornings and the borrowed rooms to find the edges of. She was proud of that. She was genuinely, fiercely proud of it, in a way she had never been proud of anything in her life. And she was allowed to feel both things. She was allowed to be proud of what she had built, and still feel the particular ache of turning around and seeing someone who had made her feel, at one point, like the world had a center. Both things were real. Neither one canceled the other. She heard footsteps in the grass behind her. She did not turn around. They were the wrong footsteps. Too light, too quick. She had known it before they were close enough to be sure. "There you are," said Clara, breathless, appearing at her left shoulder and sitting down in the grass without being invited. "Ben said you came this way. Are you all right?" "Yes," Lyra said. Clara looked at her with the direct, unguarded attention that was one of the things Lyra valued most about her, and also occasionally found exhausting. "You don't look all right." "I look exactly how I look," Lyra said, "which is fine. You look like someone who just gave the best performance of the festival and is now sitting alone by a river in the dark. Those things are not mutually exclusive." Clara was quiet for a moment. She had learned, over 6 months, when to push and when to sit with silence. This was a sitting with silence moment. She sat with it for a while, picking at the grass beside her, looking at the river. The crowd was incredible, she said finally. I've been with the troupe for a year and a half, and that was the best I've seen. Thank you. Petra is going to rewrite the tempo argument to claim she was right all along. Lyra almost smiled. She was actually right about the third number. Please don't tell her that. The river moved quietly past. Behind them, the festival sounds continued. Music from another stage, voices, occasional laughter. The night was cold and clear, and the sky had too many stars to count. There was someone in the back of the pavilion, Clara said. Carefully, not a question. Lyra looked at the river. I noticed, she said. It was nothing. Clara, to her enormous credit, did not pursue it. She nodded and picked at the grass and said, Ben wants to know if you need the wagon tonight or if you're staying at the lodging house. The lodging house. I'll tell him. Clara stood up, brushing grass from her skirt. She looked down at Lyra for a moment. You were incredible tonight. Whatever was happening, you were incredible. I know, Lyra said. Not arrogance. Fact. She had been. Clara walked back up the slope. Lyra stayed at the river for another 20 minutes. She thought about the performance and what had happened in it, the way she had reached for the fiercer version of herself, and how it had worked, how it had connected with the crowd in a way that the more careful version would not have. She thought about what that meant, about the relationship between difficulty and depth, about the things you could not access in yourself until something reached in and found them. She had known all of this in the abstract. She had read about it, in the old text that Ben kept in a wooden crate in the wagon, the writings of performers from earlier generations who had spent their lives trying to understand what the stage demanded. She had understood it the way you understand something before you have truly lived it. Tonight she had lived it. She thought about him, standing at the back of the pavilion, keeping very still. She knew that stillness. She had seen it in other contexts, in negotiations, in moments of difficulty, in the particular kind of situation where he was working very hard to manage something that was not manageable. She had recognized it from 60 feet away, and had known, in that recognition, that whatever he had come here for, it was not as simple as a king's interest in a border festival. She also knew, with the clarity that came from 3 years of uninterrupted thought, that whatever he was feeling or working through was his to work through. She had her own life now. She had built it. She stood up from the riverbank and brushed the grass from her clothes and straightened her coat. She put her shoulders back. She did the thing she did before walking toward something that mattered. She took a full breath in, held it, let it out slowly. Then she walked back up the slope toward the festival lights, toward the lodging house and Clara's warm-voiced chatter and Ben's organizational competence and Petra's ongoing argument and the wooden crate of old books in the wagon and the gold earrings in their box in her bag. Toward her life, which was hers. She did not look back at the river. The second night of the festival was tomorrow. She had a full day before the next performance. Rest, a morning walk, a long afternoon of preparation. She would sleep well tonight. She always slept well after a performance that had taken everything she had. She would not think about what she had seen in his face in that half-second when her eyes had swept the back of the pavilion. That brief, unguarded, unmanaged expression on the face of a man who spent most of his life managing his expressions very carefully. She would not think about it. She walked into the festival lights and let the noise and warmth close around her, and she said goodnight to people who called her name, and she walked the rest of the way to the lodging house, and she went to bed. She did not sleep as well as she had expected. The moon came through the window and she lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and let herself have, privately, with the same privacy she gave everything that mattered, 5 full minutes of feeling exactly what she felt, which was complicated and unwelcome and entirely real. Then she turned onto her side. She closed her eyes. She thought about the performance, about the crowd, about the older man in the front row who had beamed like the sun. She thought about Clara saying you were incredible tonight. She thought about the river and the stars and the way the grass had been cold under her hands. She thought about the gold earrings in their box in her bag. Hers. Built. Earned. She slept. The second night of the festival was warmer. Lyra felt it before she walked out. The air had shifted, carrying something from the south, and the crowd was different for it. Looser. More willing to be surprised. She filed this away with the same automatic attention she gave everything about a performance space before she stepped into it. Backstage was the same organized chaos as the night before. Owen had resolved his tempo argument with Petra by simply playing the third number at her preferred tempo during the afternoon sound check, and refusing to comment on the outcome. Petra had not commented either. They were both humming as they warmed up, which meant the issue was settled. Lyra was at the mirror. She had told herself, during the day, on the morning walk, during the long afternoon preparation, through the meal she ate carefully and without rushing, that last night was last night. That whatever had happened in the pavilion, whatever she had felt in her chest at the river, was a thing she had given its allotted time and could now set aside. She was good at setting things aside. She had built an entire life on the skill. She had not entirely convinced herself. There was a specific quality to the unsettled feeling she had been carrying since last night. It was not grief, and it was not anger. It was something more inconvenient than either of those, a sharpened awareness. As if something that had been turned down very low for 3 years had been turned up, slightly, by the sight of him in that pavilion, and was now harder to ignore than before. She did not like it. She could perform through it. She could perform through nearly anything. She had proven that to herself in the worst months. But she preferred to have the volume turned down. She preferred the life she had built in which her attention went where she pointed it rather than wandering back, uninvited, to the shadow between 2 torches at the back of a pavilion. "You're thinking again," said Clara, appearing with the hairpins. "I'm always thinking. You're thinking like it's costing you something." Lyra looked at her in the mirror. "Just pin the left side." Clara pinned the left side. She did not push further, which was the correct reading of the room. The second performance went well, not the way the first had. The first had been charged by something specific, the particular electricity of a moment that could not be manufactured. Tonight was a different kind of excellent, controlled, layered, built with craft. She gave the crowd something more intricate, something that rewarded attention over a longer arc. By the end they were still on their feet, but it was a warmer response, more appreciative, and less overwhelmed. She preferred last night's response, if she was honest. She knew what had made it. She came off stage and spoke to the troupe and changed out of her costume and put the earrings in their box and put the box in her bag, and said she was going back to the lodging house early. She meant it. She planned to sleep. She was cutting through the narrow passage between the main pavilion and the secondary storage tent when she heard the footsteps. Different footsteps this time. Heavier, measured. The footsteps of someone who had decided to go somewhere and was going there despite knowing it was probably a mistake. She knew those footsteps. She kept walking. Lyra. One word, just her name, just the one word, but it carried the weight of everything that had not been said in 3 years, and she felt it move through her the way a struck bell moves before the sound reaches the air. She stopped. She did not turn around. She stood in the narrow passage with the side of the tent to her right, and the pavilion wall to her left, and the lantern at the far end, throwing a thin stripe of gold across the ground in front of her. Lyra. She turned around. He was standing at the entrance to the passage, maybe 15 feet away, wearing the same plain riding clothes she had seen last night at the back of the pavilion. No insignia, no silver thread. Just a tall man with a straight back and a jaw that was set in the particular way it got when he had done something that required significant courage and was not going to let himself acknowledge that it required courage. She knew that jaw. She knew all of his faces. That was the problem, and had always been the problem. Not that she did not understand him, but that she understood him exactly, completely, in detail, which made the thing that had happened 3 years ago not easier, but harder. The performance was good, he said. His voice was careful, not distant, careful. There was a difference. She looked at him. She had decided, during the morning walk and the afternoon preparation, and the meal she had eaten without rushing, that if this moment came she would handle it with the same clean precision she applied to everything difficult. She would be polite. She would be brief. She would not give anything away that she had not decided to give. She was looking at him now, and she was not polite or brief. She was very still. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was level. She gave herself credit for that. Inside, the volume that had been turned up slightly since last night was now turned up significantly further, and she was doing the thing she had always had to do around him, managing the excess of feeling, the way you manage a fire that is almost too large for the space it is in. "Both nights," he said. "I was there both nights." "I know," she said. A pause. The lantern at the end of the passage swayed slightly in a passing breeze. "I wanted," he started. "The trade routes," she said. He stopped. "Corvin told someone at the inn," she said. "Word moves fast in a small festival town. Captain Wren, deep personal interest in the eastern trade routes." His jaw tightened briefly. Then, almost to her surprise, something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Not quite. Not one. That was the official reason. "I know," she said again. The passage between them felt shorter than 15 feet. That was the other thing about him. He occupied space differently than other people. It had always been like that. When he walked into a room, the room reoriented slightly, the way furniture seems to shift when you rearrange one large piece. She had once thought this was purely his physical presence. She had later understood it was something else, something that came from inside the presence, from the complete and unsettling seriousness with which he was always entirely wherever he was. He was entirely here now, in this narrow passage, with her. The performance, he said. Last night, the fourth number. She said nothing. She waited. What happened in the fourth number? He said. Whatever you were drawing on. He stopped. He was looking at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand, direct and focused and with the kind of attention that most people found difficult to sustain and he had always given as easily as breathing. It was the best thing I've seen in a very long time. The words sat between them. She had received compliments about her performances from hundreds of people. She received them with gratitude and genuine appreciation, and the knowledge that they were about the work, which was separate from her. She had learned that distinction carefully. She could not feel that distinction right now. What she felt instead was the uncomfortable recognition that being seen by him, accurately, specifically, in the thing that mattered most to her, was different from being seen by an appreciative crowd. Not better, not worth more, but different in a way that went to a place she had spent 3 years carefully closing off. I need to get back to the lodging house, she said. She said it without moving. He did not move either. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to stay. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. In the silence, she could hear the festival sounds behind the pavilion wall, the other stage, the fire pits, the distant voices, the small, warm world of the event going on around them while they stood in this narrow passage that felt increasingly like the only 2 feet of real space in the entire grounds. You didn't used to bow like that, he said. She stopped. It was such a specific thing to say. Such a precise, particular, noticed thing. She had changed the bow 3 months into the first circuit year, after a show where she had done the old court bow, the formal one, the one she had learned as a girl, and realized midway through it that the gesture was wrong. It carried the wrong meaning. The court bow said, I performed for you, and I am grateful for your attention. The bow she had developed over the following weeks said something different. It said, we did this together, and I see you, and this matters. He had noticed the difference from a crowd of hundreds. She looked at the lantern at the end of the passage. I bow for crowds now, she said, not kings. She heard him exhale, a single breath, controlled and slow. That's fair, he said. She turned and looked at him again. He was still standing at the entrance to the passage, perfectly still, hands at his sides. He looked like someone who had rehearsed what to say and had run out of the rehearsed parts and was now operating without preparation. Good, she thought. He should know what that feels like. She moved toward the end of the passage. He did not try to stop her. She had known he wouldn't. That was one of the things she had always known about him, that he would not reach out and physically stop her, not because it wouldn't have occurred to him, but because he understood that some things could not be held by force, and the attempt would only make them more determined to leave. He had done the wrong kind of holding, 3 years ago, the kind made from distance and silence and a signed document. She stopped at the lantern. She did not turn around. Why are you here? She said, not angry, honest. She heard him shift his weight. The gravel in the passage moved under his boot. I don't know how to answer that, he said. Yes, you do. A pause, long enough that she almost walked on. I needed to see that you were all right, he said. And he stopped. I needed to see that you were better than all right. She stood in the lantern light with her bag on her shoulder and the gold earrings in their box inside it, and all 3 years of the road behind her, and the festival going on beyond the wall, and the specific, inconvenient, entirely unwanted feeling that had been turned up and up and up since the moment she had swept her eyes to the back of the pavilion the night before. And now, she said. Now I know, he said. She walked out of the passage. The festival lights were ahead of her. Warm, loud, full of people who had nothing to do with either of them. She walked into it. She did not look back. But she stayed aware, the whole walk to the lodging house, of the narrow passage behind her, and the lantern, and the sound of gravel under a boot, and the particular quality of a voice saying her name when it had been a very long time since it had said it. She went to bed. She lay on her back in the dark for a long time. She was not going to let 3 words from a narrow passage undo what she had built. She was not going to be reduced. Not here, not now, not after everything. She had the road and the troop and Ben's level-headed care and Clara's pinned hair and Petra's perpetual tempo argument and the gold earrings and the river and the clear cold fact of what she had become. She had all of that. He had her name in his voice and the specific noticing of a changed bow and whatever it was he had needed to see in that pavilion that had made him ride 4 days in plain clothes under a false name. She was not going to think about that. She thought about it until nearly dawn. Corvin had known this moment was coming for 3 years. He had known it the way you know a thing that is inevitable, not because you can see the future, but because you know the people involved well enough to see the shape of what they are moving toward, even when they cannot see it themselves. He had watched Davin Ashvale for a long time, long enough to understand the difference between the king and the man, and long enough to understand that when those two things were in conflict, the man always lost. Until now, possibly. He sat across the fire from Davin on the morning of the 3rd festival day, in the small private room at the back of the inn that Mrs. Hollis had set aside for them. The king had barely eaten. The tea was untouched. He had his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the fire, and Corvin had been watching him for 20 minutes with the specific, careful attention of a man who was deciding something. Corvin was 39 years old. He had served the Silver Court for 15 of those years, the last 9 directly beside Davin. He had watched the king make 30 or 40 significant decisions in that time, some of them brilliant and some of them costly, and all of them made with a particular forward-moving certainty. Davin was a man who decided, who moved, who did not sit with uncertainty for very long, before converting it into action. He had been sitting with the same uncertainty for 3 years. Corvin had watched this, and had said nothing. He had reasons for that silence. He had told himself in the beginning that it was not his place, that Abeda's loyalty was to his king's well-being, which included respecting certain kinds of privacy, that the right time to say something would eventually present itself. He had said this for a year, then 2, now 3. Tonight he sat across the fire and looked at the king's face, the unrested eyes, the set jaw, the posture of a man doing prolonged invisible battle with something he would never admit was winning, and he decided that 3 years was more than long enough. "There is something you need to know," Corvin said. Davin looked up from the fire. He had that expression, the one that said he was prepared for news, any kind of news, and would respond to it appropriately. It was an expression Corvin had seen him deploy during the border war briefings, in the emergency council sessions, in the rooms where men tried very hard to find a crack in the king's composure. "Tell me," Davin said. Corvin kept his eyes on the fire. He had found, over the years, that looking directly at Davin while saying certain things made the saying of them more difficult, not less. The fire was easier. "When she left," Corvin said, "when you signed the order, I looked into it. Into the Renly accusation," Davin said. His voice was flat. The lord who had brought the accusation, Lord Veron Hale, born Renly, one of the Eastern Court's older families, had not been referred to by name in Davin's presence since the month after the banishment, another one of those unspoken court understandings. Into all of it, Corvin said. The letter, the testimony, everything Hale presented. A silence. Corvin heard the fire shift, a log settling, a small collapse of coals. "She never betrayed you," he said. He kept his voice level. He had rehearsed this, not the words exactly, but the steadiness required to say them. The letter was fabricated. Hale's secretary produced it, a man named Dower, who has since left the region. The testimony was built around it. There was no divided loyalty, no outside contact, no correspondence with anyone in the Northern Territories that was not entirely innocent. He paused. There was nothing. The silence that followed was not like other silences. Corvin had been in enough significant rooms in his life to understand that silences had character. Some were the silence of a person thinking, some were the silence of a person absorbing impact. This was the second kind, and it was the worst kind he had ever occupied, because the impact was not a surprise in the way that most impacts were. It was more like a confirmation. The moment when something a person had been refusing to examine became something they could no longer refuse. He kept his eyes on the fire. He did not look at the king. Davin said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely controlled. That control, Corvin knew, was not composure. It was the last professional layer of a man working very hard to keep something from showing. "How long have you known?" Davin asked. 2 months after the order was signed. Another silence. Longer. 2 months, Davin said. "Yes. And you said nothing." Corvin looked up from the fire. He owed the king that. He owed him the directness of meeting his eyes when he said the thing that needed to be said. "At first," Corvin said, I was afraid of how you would receive it. You had made the decision. The court had seen it. I told myself the disruption of reversing it would cause more damage than letting it stand. He held Davin's gaze. That was a coward's reasoning, and I knew it at the time. And then time passed, Corvin said. And the more time that passed, the harder it became to say. Not because I was afraid of you. Because I watched what it was doing to you. And I kept thinking there would be a better moment. A clearer opening. A time when saying it would not feel like reopening a wound that was almost closed. It was not almost closed, Davin said. No, Corvin said. It was not. He looked back at the fire. I was wrong to wait, he said. I knew it was wrong and I waited anyway. That is the truth, and I will not wrap it in better language. Another silence. Outside the inn, the festival was beginning to stir. Morning voices, someone hammering. The sound of the other stage being adjusted for the day's events. A ordinary morning on the festival grounds. It felt distant, entirely disconnected from the room they were sitting in. Hale, Davin said. Still in court, still holding his eastern position. He has been careful for 3 years. Careful enough that there was never a moment where the evidence I had would have produced a clean result. He is not a man who leaves obvious tracks. Corvin paused. He is, however, a man who is watching this festival very closely. Word about your presence here will have reached him by tonight. Davin looked at the fire. He fabricated it, Davin said, not a question. Yes. Because of what? The land dispute, the Kane family's eastern holdings. That is my conclusion, Corvin said. If she had remained at court, and in your confidence, the resolution of the eastern holdings question would have gone against Hale's interests. He had been working that dispute for 2 years before she arrived. She was, Corvin chose the word carefully, an obstacle. The fire had burned down while they sat. The room was lighter now, morning coming through the narrow window. Davin sat in it, completely still, the way he had been still in the war room, and in the pavilion, and in every room where he was doing the kind of thinking that did not produce visible movement. He was in my court, Davin said. Yes. He brought his evidence to my court, in front of my counsel, with his fabricated letter and his prepared testimony, and I. You made the decision a king is supposed to make when presented with evidence by a trusted noble, Corvin said. He said it not to excuse but to be accurate. You did not panic, you did not lash out, you acted within the protocols. I acted in an hour, Davin said. Yes. Without speaking to her. Corvin said nothing. There was nothing to add to that. Davin stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the festival grounds were coming to life, the morning light falling on the pavilion, the food stalls setting up, early visitors making their way down the paths. He stood with his back to the room and both hands gripping the windowsill. 3 years, he said. Yes. She spent 3 years. He stopped himself. Corvin watched the back of him, the shoulders, the set of the neck, the slight downward angle of the head. There was a specific kind of pain that produced that particular angle. He had only seen it twice before in 9 years of working beside this man. He did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. Davin released the windowsill. He turned around. His face was controlled, the professional layer back in place, which Corvin knew now how to read. Behind it was something that had not been there yesterday, something that had changed the quality of the control, like a building that looked the same from the outside but had had a wall removed inside. Hale's evidence, Davin said. Documented. I have it all. Where? In a sealed folder in my saddlebag. I have had it with me for almost 3 years. Corvin held the king's gaze. I brought it here because I thought this might be the time. Something moved in Davin's expression. Not softness. It was harder than softness. Something that had come through heat and was now very solid. I want to see it today, he said. I'll get it now. And then, he stopped. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked at the fire. I need to think. I know. I need an hour. I'll be outside. Corvin stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, because he had stopped in this position before, in this gesture, and it seemed to be the right place to say the things that needed saying. She performed again last night, Corvin said. He had been there, had stood at the back while Davin was backstage, had watched the second show, different from the first night, more precise, quieter in some ways. But you could see. He stopped and started again. The thing about her performances is that you can see the person, the actual person, not the stage version. He looked at the doorframe. Whatever she has built in 3 years, it is a real thing. It is not a recovery. It is not a performance. It is her. He waited for Davin to say something. Davin said nothing for a moment. Then, I know, he said quietly. I know exactly what it is. Corvin opened the door. Outside, Mrs. Hollis was moving down the corridor with the particular brisk energy of someone who managed a busy inn during festival season and had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. She glanced at Corvin briefly, nodded with professional courtesy, and kept moving. He walked to the stables, retrieved the sealed folder from his saddlebag, and stood for a moment in the stable door with it in his hands. 3 years of waiting to hand this over. 3 years of carrying it with the specific weight of knowing. He carried it back to the inn. He knocked on the door to the private room and waited. "Come in," Davin said. He was standing at the window again. The fire had gone down to coals. The morning light was fully in the room now. Corvin set the folder on the table. He did not say anything else. He walked back to the door. Behind him, he heard the sound of the folder being picked up. He heard the wax seal break. He heard the first page turn. He walked out and pulled the door closed, and he stood in the corridor for a moment, and he thought about all the days that had led to this one, and he thought about a woman on a stage giving the best version of herself to a crowd of strangers in a pavilion lit by fire, and he thought about a king who had spent 3 years moving pieces on a map. He thought that the worst thing about doing the right thing 3 years too late was not that it was too late. Sometimes too late was not too late. Sometimes it was just later than it should have been. He went downstairs and drank his breakfast tea and waited. The folder had 31 pages. Davin read all of them. He read them standing at the window, in the morning light, without sitting down. He read the depositions Corvin had obtained from 2 witnesses who had been in the room when Lord Hale's secretary produced the fabricated letter. Witnesses who had said nothing at the time because Hale was powerful and they were not, and who had spoken only when Corvin came to them quietly and separately, and made it clear that speaking was now the safer option. He read the timeline Corvin had constructed showing that the letter's supposed dates were impossible, that Lyra had been documented in the Silver Court on the days the letter claimed she had been elsewhere, in the company of people who had nothing to do with the Silver Court's concerns. He read the section on Hale's land dispute, on the Kane family's eastern holdings, which had been under contention for 2 years before Lyra ever set foot in the court, on the specific way in which Lyra's position, her access, her relationship with the king, represented a genuine threat to Hale's strategy, which had been built on the assumption that the Eastern Holding resolution would go through channels that he controlled. He read all of it. He turned the last page. He set the folder down. He stood at the window for a long time. He was doing the thing he did in the worst situations, the thing he never let anyone see, the one concession to something human and unmanageable that he allowed himself, which was to hold very still and feel the full weight of what had happened, and not move through it too quickly, and not convert it too fast into something useful or actionable or kingly. He just stood there. After the specified hour was up, he opened the door and told Corvin, who was sitting at the foot of the stairs reading a small book and eating a piece of bread, that he needed to speak to him. "Hale will hear about the conversation in the passage last night," Davin said. "Almost certainly," Corvin agreed, standing and closing the book. "He will move." "Yes. He has been watching this situation since your arrival. He has a man in the festival staff. Not confirmed, but probable. What is his most likely action?" Corvin thought for a moment. "He cannot go to the council while you are here without appearing to act against a decision you are personally reassessing. He is too careful for that. More likely," he paused, "he will begin preparing the ground. He will position himself so that any reversal of the banishment becomes something he can argue against on principle rather than personal interest. He will need someone to make that case before you return to the Silver Court." "Lady Pemberton," Davin said. He had already been thinking about this. Lady Pemberton was Hale's current closest political ally in the inner court. She had the relationships, the position, and the particular kind of court skill that could shape a narrative before anyone had a chance to examine it. "That would be my read," Corvin said. "Timeline? He has a fast rider, 2 days for communication back to court, another 2 for Pemberton to begin moving. Then we have 4 days. To what end?" Corvin asked. Carefully, not challenging, asking the specific question that needed to be asked. Davin looked at him. "I am going to find her," he said. "Not as the king, not tonight, not for the performance. Today, as a man who has something to tell her and something to ask." Corvin absorbed this. His expression stayed steady, which was Corvin's gift, the ability to absorb significant information without showing anything on his face that might complicate the moment. "She may not receive you," he said. "I know. If she does, that is her decision." Corvin nodded slowly. "And Hale?" "I will handle Hale when we return." I have had the evidence for 3 years whether I knew it or not. A few more days will not change what it proves. He paused. But it changes what I am doing and why I am doing it. I will not go after Hale for strategic reasons. I will go after him because it is the right thing to do, and because it should have been done long ago, and that will happen regardless of anything else. Corvin studied him for a moment. Regardless of how she receives you. Regardless of that, Davin said. What Hale did to her deserves a response that has nothing to do with what she and I are, or are not to each other. Those are separate things. Corvin seemed to weigh this for a moment. Then he nodded, and the nod had a different quality to it than his usual professional acknowledgement. It was the nod of someone who had been waiting a long time to see a particular thing, and had just seen it. She finishes her morning preparations by mid-morning, Corvin said. Ben, the troop manager, takes a walk along the North River path at around that time. Clara, the young dresser, typically handles the costume checks at the lodging house. Davin looked at him. How long have you known the troop's routine? I have been watching them since yesterday morning, Corvin said without any apparent guilt. Professionally, in case the information became relevant. One stay. Davin almost, smiled. He went to find her. Not with any particular plan. He had a history of planning, and this was the moment to stop doing that, or at least to stop pretending that a plan could account for the person he was about to face. Lyra had never been accountable to plans, not his, not anyone's. He found her at the river. Not the same spot as the night before. She was further upstream, where the trees came close to the water and the bank was higher, and she was sitting on the bank with her feet not quite at the water's edge, and a small book open in her lap that she was not reading. He could tell she was not reading from 30 feet away, from the angle of her head and the stillness of her eyes, and the particular quality of not looking that was different from absorption. She heard him coming before he was close enough to speak. She had always had that, the awareness of a person who had learned to be attentive to their environment. She looked up from the unread book. She looked at him. She did not tell him to go away. He took that as the only permission he had been given and walked up to the bank and sat down near her, not beside her, a respectful distance, one that said he was not assuming anything about this proximity. She went back to looking at the water. They sat like that for a moment. The river moved. The trees were bare above them, the sky through the branches a pale, cold blue. Corvin told me, she said, not a question, not surprised. He looked at her. You already knew he knew? I suspected, she said. He was always too careful around the subject, careful in the way someone is careful when they are carrying something that doesn't belong to them. She turned the pages of the unread book without reading any of them. What did he tell you? Everything, Davin said. She nodded. One small, controlled movement. How long have you known? He asked. She turned a page. I have known that the evidence was fabricated since approximately 6 months after I left. She said it simply, the way she said most things, directly, without performance. I had time. On the road. I could think. I went back through every interaction I had had with Hale over the 2 years prior, and I understood what had happened. She paused. I wrote a letter. Something tightened in his chest. To the court, she said, to Corvin, specifically. I did not send it to you directly because I did not think you would. She stopped. Started differently. I thought a letter from me would be dismissed. I sent it to Corvin because I thought Corvin would look into it. He did, Davin said. I know. She closed the book. She set it beside her on the bank. She looked at the water. I know because he sent a reply. Very brief. He said the investigation was ongoing and he would inform me of any resolution. She turned to look at Davin directly for the first time since he had sat down. He did not inform me of any resolution. No, Davin said. He waited too long. He knows that. I know it. She looked at him for a moment. That expression, the one from 3 years ago in the court chamber, the one he had spent 3 years trying to name. He could name it now. He had had time, reading Corvin's folder, to understand what she had been seeing that day. She had been seeing someone who was brilliant at being a king, and was about to prove it at the cost of being anything else. She looked at him, and what he saw was not that expression anymore. I spent 3 months being angry, she said, about the fabrication, about the order, about all of it. The anger was clean and I was good at it, and it kept me moving in the worst part of the first year. She was quiet for a moment. Then I stopped being angry. Not because I forgave anything, because I was busy, because I had things to build, because, she stopped again, because anger at that distance is expensive, Davin said quietly. Yes, she looked at him. Expensive and useless, and it takes from the things that matter. He nodded. I want to be very clear, she said, about something. All right. What Hale did, what happened with that letter. That explains the mechanism. It explains the how. She turned her body slightly toward him, and the morning light fell across her face, and he could see all of it. The 3 years, the road, the work, the barn and the auditions and the earned earrings and everything in between. All of it written in the particular way a person's face changes when they have actually lived, rather than simply continuing. It does not explain why you signed a document that could have waited, why you did not come to me first, why you chose, in that specific hour, to believe a fabricated letter, rather than 3 years of knowing me. She said all of this without anger. That was the thing that was hardest to sit with, that she had moved through the anger and out the other side, and what remained was not softness, but something more demanding. Clarity. I was afraid, he said. He had not said that out loud before. Not to Corvin, not to himself in the language of actual words. He had circled it, examined it, understood it in an abstract way, but saying it with his voice, in the open air, to the person he had most wronged with it, that was different. Of what? She asked. Of being wrong, he said. About you. About the thing I felt for you. About whether something as significant as what was between us was real, or whether I had made it into what I wanted it to be. He kept his eyes on the river. I had been told, my entire life, that kings were susceptible to that particular deception. That the people closest to them could seem one thing and be another. When Hale brought the evidence, I told myself I was seeing clearly. I told myself the clear-eyed version of a king would believe the documented evidence rather than his own feelings. He paused. I believed the document, he said, because believing the document was easier than believing that I had been given something real and might still lose it. The river moved. A branch above them shifted in a passing breeze. You lost it anyway, she said. Yes, he said. I lost it because I was afraid of losing it. She looked at the river. He looked at her. She said, I don't know what you want from this conversation. I know what I want, he said. I am not asking for it. You don't owe me anything, not forgiveness, not a reopened door, not a continuation of something I destroyed. I know that. Whatever I want from this conversation is separate from what you owe, because you owe me nothing. She was quiet. He waited. What do you want? She said finally. He looked at her clearly. An accounting, he said. I want to sit here, at whatever distance you can tolerate, and hear what I cost you, all of it. The real cost, not the version a king's conscience would prefer to hear. I want you to tell me, and I want to hear it properly, and I want to hold all of it without defending myself. She looked at him for a long moment. You have until morning, she said. He had heard harder things in his life. He could not, at that moment, remember when. All right, he said. She turned back to the river, picked up her book, set it in her lap again, did not open it. The morning was cold and clear and entirely quiet around them, except for the river and the bare trees, and the distant, small sounds of the festival beginning its 3rd day without them. He stayed. She did not start immediately. They sat at the river's edge for a while, him near her with the closed book in her lap, both of them looking at the water. The festival sounds were distant. A bird moved through the bare trees above them. The river was low for the season and very clear, and she watched a leaf travel along the current for a while, slowly, catching on a submerged rock and then releasing. She had been asked to account for things before. Ben asked her sometimes, when a performance had gone wrong, to walk through what had happened so they could understand it. She did it precisely, and without self-pity, and without excessive self-blame. She had gotten very good at it. This was not the same thing. This was not about a performance. The first month, she said, I slept in a barn. She heard him draw a breath. She kept her eyes on the river. It was on a farm north of the Willowmere Road. The farmer did not know I was there for the first 3 nights. When he found me, he was not unkind about it. He let me stay for another week in exchange for help with the evening chores. He was an old man who had lost his wife the previous spring and did not have a great deal of patience for conversation, which suited me. She paused. His barn was cold but dry. I was grateful for both. Davin said nothing. She had told him she would talk, and he had agreed to listen, and he was. She could feel it, listening completely, not preparing a response, not forming his defense, just taking it in. She continued. I left the farm after 2 weeks because I had a small amount of money, and I did not want to spend it on shelter yet. I needed to understand what I was doing, what the goal was. I knew I could perform. I had always known that. What I did not know was whether I could build a life from it, independently, without the structure of the court around me. She turned the closed book over in her hands. I tried 11 auditions in the first 2 months. I failed 10 of them. What happened at the 10th? He asked. Quiet. No inflection. The manager told me I was technically skilled, but had nothing underneath it. She said this without flinching. He was not entirely wrong. In those months, I was performing from the outside in. I knew the forms, but the center was still in shock. I had not yet rebuilt what I lost when I left. She stopped. Rebuilt was not precisely the right word. She had not rebuilt what she lost. She had built something new. When I left the court, the forms were still there. The center was not. And the 11th? Ben, she said. He came to the audition and offered me a position before I had finished. She turned the book back over. I will not reduce Ben Harlow to a useful plot point in a story about your mistakes. He was a genuine thing in a time when I needed genuine things. I am not asking you to reduce him, Davin said. Good. She looked at the water. The first 6 months with the troupe were the hardest thing I have ever done, and I mean that, including everything that came before it. Not because the work was hard. I have always been good with hard work, but because I had to find out who I was in a completely new context, without the identity the court had given me. She stopped. Started again, without the thing between us, which had become, without my fully realizing it, a significant part of how I understood myself. And she felt, rather than saw him react to that. Nothing visible, just the quality of his attention changing, becoming more careful. That is not a romantic admission, she said. It is an accounting of a practical problem. When you define yourself partly through a significant relationship, and that relationship disappears overnight, you have to rebuild your understanding of yourself from the ground up. That takes time, and it is not a comfortable process. How long? He asked. To fully rebuild? I am not sure it is ever fully rebuilt. Rebuilt suggests you get back what you started with. She looked at the trees above them. What I built is different. It is not a recovered version of who I was at court. It is something I made from what I had left, which included things I did not know were available to me because I had never needed to find them. He was quiet for a moment. What was left? He asked. It was a careful question. He was asking it the way you ask something when you genuinely do not know the answer, and understand that getting it wrong is not an option. Stubbornness, she said, which I had always had but had not fully valued. The ability to perform without support, which I discovered I could do much longer than I expected. Ben's troupe, which became a kind of family, not a substitute for anything I had lost but its own real thing. Clara's competence. Petra's argument about tempo. Owen's loud drums. She paused. And the knowledge, which I had to earn over a very long time, that my worth as a performer and as a person was not contingent on whether it was seen by any particular person. She heard him exhale. That last one, she said, took 2 years. I'm sorry, he said. She had expected that. She had been waiting for it. She had also not known, until this moment, what it would feel like to hear it, whether it would ease something or change something or simply land flat on the ground between them. It did not land flat. It landed in the way that real things land, which is with weight and without drama. It was a single sentence and it was entirely meant, and she felt it settle into a place she had not been willing to acknowledge was still waiting for something to settle there. She said nothing for a moment. Then she reached into the bag beside her on the bank and took out the gold earring box. She opened it. She held one of the earrings up so the winter light caught it. I bought these, she said, in a market town, 3 months into the first circuit year. They cost more than I should have spent. I stood at the market stall for 10 minutes running the numbers before I bought them. She looked at the earring in her fingers. I needed something that I had made, something solid, something that no one had given me and no one could revoke. She closed her fingers around it. These are mine. Everything that came after you, the road, the troupe, the performances, Clara's pinned hair, Petra's argument, I built all of it. It belongs to me in a way that nothing belonging to the court ever did. She looked at him. I know that, he said. I don't want you to take it from me, she said. I am not. This conversation is not about going back to what we were. I am not telling you what I lost so that you can see yourself as the thing that fills the space. You need to understand that. I do understand it, he said. She looked at him more closely. He was not defensive. He was not doing the thing she had sometimes feared he would do. The thing where a man who wants something from you hears your pain as an invitation rather than a line. He was looking back at her with the expression she had not been able to name 3 years ago. She could name it now because she had spent 3 years with enough distance to think clearly. It was grief, simply that. The expression of a man sitting with the full weight of what he had done, and not trying to move it somewhere more comfortable. She put the earring back in the box. The 11 auditions, she said. The barn. The months where I performed from the outside in, and knew it, and did not know how to fix it. The specific loneliness of being in a different town every week, for the better part of a year. The 2 times I cried about it, I only allowed myself 2, which was its own kind of cost. The morning I realized I did not know who I was outside of a context that no longer existed. She looked at the river. The morning, 6 months after that, when I realized I had found out. She felt him listening. That second morning, she said, was the best morning of my life. Better than anything that happened at court. And Hale's fabrication gave me that morning because your decision put me on the road, and the road put me through everything necessary to get there. She set the earring box back in her bag. I am not grateful for the road. I am not thanking you for the opportunity to suffer. But I am also not only a person who was damaged by what happened. I am a person who built something from it. And the thing I built is real. I know, he said. I have been watching you perform for 2 nights. Performing is not the whole picture. No, he said, but it shows the center. You said the first months the center was missing. The center is not missing now. She looked at him. No, she said. It is not. They sat for a moment, with that between them. The river moved. The leaf she had been watching earlier had gone around the bend and out of sight. Your center, she said, I cannot account for. I have been on the road. I do not know what you have been doing in 3 years except ruling your kingdom, which you presumably do very well. Well enough, he said. Not in the ways that matter to me most. She looked at her hands. What matters to you most? It was not phrased as a question. She already knew the answer, and she was not going to make it easy for him by asking. He said it anyway. She gave him credit for that. Being a person who acts from what he actually knows rather than what he is afraid of discovering, he said. Being in a room with someone I trust and not, he stopped, started differently. Not being the kind of man who destroys the thing he values most because he is afraid to be wrong about whether it is real. She looked at the river. And now, she said. She had asked him that in the passage 2 nights ago and he had said, now I know. She wanted to hear what he said to it today, with the folder on the inn table and the morning between them and the full accounting out in the open air. Now I know that it was real, he said, and that I wasted 3 years being certain of something I should have been honest enough to be uncertain about. He paused. And I know, he said, that whatever happens from here, whether you tell me to get on my horse and ride back to the Silver Court and never contact you again, which you would be entirely right to do, I am going to go back and dismantle what Hale built, publicly and completely, because that is the right thing to do, and because you deserve to have it done 3 years ago. She looked at him. He was watching her with the direct, focused attention that had always done something specific to her. Not pressure, not possession. Just the feeling of being seen completely, in all directions. You're going to do that regardless of what I say, she said. Yes. And you wanted me to know that before I said anything. Yes. She thought about this for a moment. That's the first genuinely right thing you've done in this conversation, she said. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile, something that would have been a smile in a lighter moment. It might be the first genuinely right thing I've done in 3 years, he said. She picked up her closed book and stood from the bank. She brushed the grass from her coat. She looked down at him. He was still sitting, looking up at her, making no move to stand until she indicated one way or another what came next. There is a food stall near the east gate, she said, that makes very good bread in the mornings. I am going there. I am going alone. He nodded. But, she said, I perform tonight, the last night of the festival. And after the performance, if you are still here, and if you want to continue this conversation, she stopped. She looked at the river one more time, the empty place where the leaf had been. I am not making you any promise. I am not closing any door, and I am not opening any door either. I am simply saying that the accounting is not finished. He stood. He was taller than she had remembered, which she would not admit, and he was looking at her the way he had been looking at her all morning, like she was the only fixed point in the landscape. I will be here, he said. Good, she said, then be here. She walked up the bank without looking back. The morning was cold and the festival was ahead of her, and behind her she could feel him watching the way she had always been able to feel him watching, with an attention that had never been passive, and she walked toward the east gate, toward the bread stall, toward Clara and Petra and Ben and the third and final performance, and she put her hand in her bag and touched the gold earring box briefly, just once, just to confirm it was there, and kept walking. She was still herself, completely, entirely, solidly herself. That was the accounting that mattered most. Everything else was still being written. By midday, Hale knew. He did not know everything. He did not know about the folder or Corvin's investigation, or the riverbank accounting that had lasted a morning. He knew only what his man and the festival staff had been able to observe and report, that the king had left the pavilion after the second night's performance and gone backstage, that there had been a conversation in the service passage, and that the conversation had been private enough that no specifics were available. He knew that the king had come to this festival under a false name to watch an exiled woman perform. He knew that the king had sought her out afterward. He knew that whatever had been dormant for 3 years had been, in the last 48 hours, woken up. That was enough. He sent his rider at noon on the third day. Lord Veron Hale was 54 years old and had been in the Eastern Court network for 30 of those years. He was not a man who panicked. He was a man who maintained options and closed them down only when necessary. The option he needed to close down now was the possibility that Davin Ashvale would return to the Silver Court with any intention toward Lyra Kane that might cause someone to look at the Eastern land dispute again. He wrote the letter with care. He addressed it to Lady Pemberton, who understood the Eastern Court's interests and who had, over 4 years, become his most reliable voice in the inner court. He did not say anything explicit. He did not need to. Pemberton was skilled enough to hear what was not written and to begin moving pieces that Hale could not move himself from this distance. What he wrote amounted to a single meaning. The king's recent behavior at the festival is a matter of concern for court stability. The subject of the king's attention is a woman who was removed from the court on the basis of a serious finding. The appropriate voices should be prepared to raise appropriate questions about the wisdom of any reversal. He sealed the letter. He handed it to his rider. The rider left at a pace that said it was not an ordinary message. Hale stood in the doorway of the lodge he had rented for the festival season and looked across the valley at the pavilion, where the third night's performance was being set up. He did not feel satisfied exactly. Satisfaction was for men who had secured an outcome. He had only ensured that the terrain was unfavorable for the outcome he wanted to prevent. Whether that would be enough depended on things he could not fully control. He did not like depending on things he could not fully control. He went inside. Corvin had known there would be a rider. He did not know when or the exact content, but he had expected it from the moment he told the king what he knew. He had expected it because Hale was a systematic man, and systematic men did not leave their flanks unguarded for long. He positioned one of the 6 riders, a young woman named Nell, who looked unremarkable and moved quietly and had an excellent memory, to watch the road from Hale's lodge at midday. She came back at 1 in the afternoon with a description of the rider's horse, equipment, and direction. Court-bound, fast. Corvin found Davin at the inn, eating a late breakfast with the focused attention of a man who had not eaten properly in several days and was correcting for it. Hale's rider left an hour ago, he said. He sat down across from him. Court direction, moving fast. Davin set down his fork. He looked at Corvin the way he had looked at him in the early days of the border war, when situation reports came in and required immediate translation into decision. Pemberton, he said. My assumption. She will try to set the ground before we return. Yes. What do we have? Everything in the folder, Corvin said. 31 pages. Independently obtained. Individually verifiable. Dower has left the region, but I know where he went. He is in a fishing village 2 days north of the Silver Court. Retrievable, with the right approach. He paused. The 2 witnesses who gave the original depositions are still in their positions. They spoke to me willingly enough before. I believe they will speak again, on a more formal basis, if the situation makes it clear that Hale's protection of them is no longer reliable. Davin looked at his plate for a moment, then he looked at Corvin. I want this done correctly, he said. I know. Not as retaliation. I will not have it look like the king dismantling a political enemy for personal reasons. Whatever the personal reasons, and they exist, I am not pretending otherwise. The case against Hale has to stand entirely on what he did and what it cost. It does stand on that, Corvin said. The personal and the principled happen to align here. That is not a problem. It is just inconvenient for appearance management. Davin picked up his fork again. He ate for a moment. Then he said without looking up, How long do we have before Pemberton can move effectively? 4 days. She is good, but she needs time to build the case, and she does not yet know exactly what she is building against. She knows the broad outline: king and exiled woman, festival, potential reversal of a 3-year-old banishment. She does not know about Corvin's folder, or the fabricated evidence. When she finds out about the folder, Hale will tell her eventually, but he will not do it immediately because he does not know we have it. He knows I investigated at the time. He does not know what I found or whether I kept it. Corvin paused. He will find out when you present it to the council. Not before. Davin nodded. He finished his breakfast. I am not going back before the last performance tonight, he said. Corvin said nothing. He had not expected anything different. Is that a problem for the timeline? No, Corvin said. We ride tomorrow morning. We arrive at the Silver Court in a day and a half. Pemberton will have had 2.5 days to prepare. She will be ready. We will be ready. He looked at the king. We have been ready for 3 years. Davin looked at him. Have you told her, Davin said, about Hale moving? No, Corvin said. She is preparing for a performance. It is her last night of the festival. She does not need the weight of it today. She would want to know. She would, and she will know. But not from me, today, in the hours before she performs. Corvin met the king's gaze directly. With respect, there are some decisions about what Lyra Kane needs to know and when that are not yours to make right now. Davin held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Fair, he said. Outside the inn, the festival's final afternoon was building its particular energy, the slightly heightened, slightly bittersweet quality of a last day, when the crowd knows that tonight is the conclusion and brings everything they have left to it. Lyra Kane would feel that when she walked out. She would use it, Corvin suspected, in whatever way she used the things the crowd gave her. He thought about the performance he had seen last night, the second one, quieter than the first, more precisely controlled. He thought about what he had said to the king at the door that morning. You can see the person, the actual person. He had meant it entirely. Whatever happened in the next week at the Silver Court, whatever the council made of the folder, whatever Pemberton constructed and Hale attempted and the machinery of the court produced, none of it changed what that woman had built on the road in 3 years. Court outcomes could go many ways. What she had become was not a court outcome. It was a fact. He was glad Davin had finally been made to see it. He was more glad that he had finally said the thing he should have said 2 months into the investigation, at the beginning of the second year at the latest, when he had known with certainty what had happened, and had chosen to wait for a better time. There was no better time. There was only the time you decided to speak. He stood from the table. I will brief the riders for tomorrow's departure. Early start. Before dawn. Before dawn, Corvin confirmed. He walked out. The afternoon passed. The festival made its preparations. The pavilion was set up for the final night, lanterns polished, benches wiped down, the stage refreshed. The crowd that arrived for the last performance was the largest of the 3 nights, swelled by people who had come specifically because word had spread about what was happening in that pavilion, about the woman performing in it, about the particular quality of what she was giving the audiences. Word traveled fast at a festival. Davin did not go backstage. He did not send any message. He went to the pavilion when the doors opened, at the beginning of the evening, and he found a position near the back, not the same shadow as the first 2 nights, but a different spot, slightly more toward the center, slightly less hidden. He did not tell himself he was there for the trade routes. He stood and watched the pavilion fill, and he thought about the morning at the river, and the accounting, and the way she had stood up from the bank and said, "Everything that came after you, I built." He thought about what it cost her to say that, not the emotion of it but the precision of it. The deliberate decision to name what was hers without softening it, without allowing him to reclaim any of it, as a story in which he played a larger role than the one he had actually played, which was the role of the thing she had survived. He had survived things too, in 3 years. He had won a border war. He had maintained a court. He had done every one of the things a king was supposed to do, with the competence he had always had. He had not done the thing a man was supposed to do. He had not been honest, not in the way that cost something. He was being honest now. He did not know if it was enough. He did not think that was the right frame. Enough for what? For her to trust him again? For there to be something between them again? Those things were not the goal. The goal was to be the version of himself that she had once, briefly, seen. The one that existed before he had convinced himself that being a king required him to eliminate everything that was not strategic. The lights in the pavilion went down. The music began. She walked out. The crowd responded the way it always did to her. That collective lean, that instinctive orientation. He watched it happen for the 3rd time, and felt the same thing he had felt the first and second times, the particular helpless clarity of a man who has been trying very hard to be confused about something that is not, and has never been, confusing. He watched the final performance. She gave them something different on the 3rd night. Both previous nights had been complete in themselves, the first electrified, the second precise. This one was both of those things, and also something that did not have a clear name. It had the quality of a thing being offered without expectation of return, like she was giving the crowd something that did not require them to give anything back, something that simply existed between them and then was gone. By the end, there was a moment. The last number, the final phrase, when the pavilion went completely quiet. Not the quiet of an audience waiting, the quiet of a large group of people who had received something real and were sitting with it before they could make the sound that comes after. Then the sound came, and it was the largest sound of the 3 nights. She stood on the stage and received it with her eyes clear and open, her posture straight, her expression saying the thing that her expression had always said at the end. I see you. We did this together. This mattered. She bowed. She walked off the stage. The crowd began to move, slowly, reluctantly, the way crowds move when they are not quite ready to stop being what they became in the performance. People paused to speak to each other, to confirm with a stranger that yes, that was real. That was not something they had imagined. They laughed and embraced and pointed at the stage as if the thing that had happened there was still visible on it. Davin stood at the back and waited. He had told her he would be here. He was here. She changed out of her costume for the last time in that backstage room. The troupe was loud around her, the good loud, the kind that came after a successful closing night, full of released tension and genuine warmth and the particular kind of exhaustion that felt like satisfaction rather than depletion. Ben was already discussing route options for the next circuit with Owen, who was folding up the drum kit with one hand and gesturing with the other. Petra had made the decisive announcement that the tempo had been perfect all 3 nights, which was not quite accurate but was the right thing to say at the end of a run, and nobody argued with her. Clara was carefully packing the costume into its travel case. 17 pins this time, Clara announced, holding up a handful of them like evidence. Last night was 14. The second act requires more stability, Lyra said. The second act requires you to stop touching your hair when you're thinking. I'll take it under consideration. She sat at the cracked mirror for the last time and removed the stage makeup methodically. Below the stage face, in the mirror, was the everyday face, plainer, more tired, more true. She looked at it without judgment. It was hers. She had learned not to find one version more valuable than the other. She reached for the gold earring box. She held it for a moment without opening it. Then she opened it, looked at the earrings and put the lid back on and put the box in her bag. She had not worn them for the performance. She wore them after. On the road, on ordinary days, when she needed the reminder that the box could carry. Tonight she did not feel she needed the reminder in the same way. She knew where she was. Lyra, Ben said, appearing in the mirror behind her. His voice had a particular quality, careful, questioning, the one he used when he was about to say something that was none of his business and knew it. He's outside, she said. Ben closed his mouth. I know, she said. I've known since the first night. Ah, Ben said. Then, after a moment, are you all right? She looked at herself in the cracked mirror. The crack cut across the lower left corner, and the reflection in that part was slightly fragmented, splitting a single image into something with an edge in it. Yes, she said. I think I actually am. Ben nodded. He was a man who trusted the people around him to know themselves. He had built his entire management philosophy on that trust, which was why it worked. We leave tomorrow morning, he said. Wagons loaded at dawn. I'll be there. He disappeared back into the troop noise. Clara finished packing the costume and handed Lyra her coat and said goodnight with the directness of someone who had figured out, in the last 20 minutes, what the plan was and had decided to respect it. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the backstage room for the last time. The pavilion was emptying. Most of the crowd had gone. The night was cold and the final performance had ended 40 minutes ago, and the kind of people who attended festivals in late autumn were sensible about the walk back. The maintenance staff were collecting the benches. A couple of the lanterns had been extinguished. He was near the back of the pavilion, not in the shadow anymore. He had moved toward the center, slightly, into the light that remained. He was standing with both hands at his sides, plain coat, no insignia, and he was watching her come out from the backstage area, the way she had watched the leaf on the river that morning, tracking something that had its own direction and was not his to redirect. She walked toward him, not running, not performing, just walking across the pavilion with the bag on her shoulder and the coat buttoned to the collar and the gold earring box in the bag, and all of the road and all of the work and the full, solid weight of the last 3 years behind her like something she was not carrying but was simply part of. She stopped when there was a comfortable distance between them, not the 15 feet of the passage 2 nights ago, closer. You stayed, she said. I told you I would. She looked at him in the low light. The maintenance staff moved around the edges of the pavilion, giving them space without being asked. Perhaps they could feel the particular quality of the moment, or perhaps they simply had the good judgment of people who worked an event and could read a room. Corvin is riding tomorrow, she said. Yes, before dawn. Hale's rider went north yesterday afternoon. You know about that. It was not a question. He did not treat it as one. Yes. So you are going back to dismantle him? Yes. Good, she said, flat, certain. He deserves every part of it. He nodded. You didn't come to me tonight to tell me that, she said. No, he said. I came because I said I would be here. And because the accounting you said was not finished, I wanted to give you the rest of whatever you needed. She considered this. The maintenance staff had moved to the far side of the pavilion. The last lantern near them cast a warm, impractical light across the ground between them. Somewhere outside, the festival was making its final sounds, distant music from a smaller stage, the laughter of people heading home. I want to tell you something, she said. He waited. I told you this morning what I built, she said. I told you what it cost, and what I made from the cost. And I told you that I am not the same person who left the court. Not a recovered version, not a continuation, something new. She looked at the lantern for a moment. That is all true. I know it is, he said. What I did not tell you this morning, she said, is that being something new does not mean being finished. She looked back at him. I was very clear about my independence this morning. I stand by every word of it. But I was also slightly using it as a wall. I noticed, he said. Good. You were meant to. She shifted the bag on her shoulder. The wall was real. What I said was true. I built something and it is mine, and no one is walking into it without permission. I know, he said. But I am telling you now, she said, that the door is not closed. The words settled in the space between them. She watched him receive them, watched the particular thing that happened to his face when something he had not expected happened. Not a performance of relief, not a visible exhale. Something quieter and more real than either of those things. A settling. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. I said the door is not closed. I did not say it was open. I said I am not making you any promise, and I meant it. I am going north with the troop tomorrow morning. We have 3 more circuit stops and then we winter in the Alderton region. Ben has a long-standing arrangement there. I know, he said. You turned down a permanent position. I did, she looked at him. I may turn down other things too. That is not a warning. It is a description of who I am now. I am not asking you to be anyone other than who you are now, he said. What you are now is specifically what I came to this festival to see. She held his gaze. There was a thing between them that had no name in the language she used for other things. It was not what they had been at court, which had been real but young. 2 people at the beginning of understanding each other. It was not nothing. It was not the same as before. It was something that had been tested, had been broken, had been built separately into 2 different forms, and was now looking at itself across the distance of everything that had happened and deciding what it wanted to be next. She did not know yet. She did not think she was supposed to know yet. You have a court to go back to, she said. You have Hale to dismantle and Pemberton to manage, and a council to face. That is going to take everything you have for several weeks. Yes, he said. Handle it well, she said. Not for me. Because it is the right thing to do, and because you are capable of doing it correctly. I intend to, he said. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold air coming through the open pavilion entrance. When it is done, she said, when the Hale situation is resolved and the truth is in the open where it belongs. She paused. You know where I'll be. She turned and walked toward the entrance. She was outside before she heard him move. She did not look back. The cold air hit her face, and the festival sounds wrapped around her, and the path ahead was lit at intervals by lanterns on poles driven into the ground. She walked it. At the east gate she stopped. Not because she was uncertain, because she wanted to stand still for a moment and feel the full weight of what the last 3 days had been. Not to hold it or replay it, but simply to acknowledge it. The way you acknowledge a significant weather event. It happened. It was real. You came through it. She was standing at the east gate with her hand on the post when Clara appeared beside her, slightly breathless, coat buttoned unevenly. I thought you had already gone to the lodging house, Lyra said. I wanted to make sure you got there, Clara said, without embarrassment. Lyra looked at her. Clara was 17 and competent and had, at some point in the last 6 months, become something that Lyra had not had in a very long time. A person who showed up without being asked. I am fine, Lyra said. I know, Clara said. I still wanted to make sure. They walked back to the lodging house together. In the morning, before first light, the troop loaded the wagon, and Lyra helped, because she always helped. She carried the heavier costume cases out, and passed them up to Owen, who had a gift for fitting impractical quantities of things into limited spaces. She double-checked the lock on the instrument box at Ben's request. She accepted the mug of tea Mrs. Hollis at the festival's lodging house pressed on her before they left, because Mrs. Hollis was not the kind of woman you refuse tea from. She was climbing up onto the wagon seat when she heard horses leaving from the inn further down the road. Not many, 6 or 7, moving at the pace of people who had a long way to go and were starting early to cover it. She did not look. She did not need to. She settled onto the wagon seat beside Clara, who was already wrapped in a blanket and holding her own tea with the focused attention of someone who was not yet fully awake. Ben climbed up to drive. The wagon moved. The road north ran parallel to the east road for about a mile before they diverged. Lyra looked ahead, at the gray beginning of morning light over the hills, at the road stretching toward the next circuit stop, toward the 3 remaining performances and then the long winter, and the Alderton arrangement and whatever came after that. She put her hand in her bag. She found the earring box. She held it. The road east was long, she knew that. She had traveled it herself, 3 years ago, going in the other direction, with nothing but what she was carrying. She thought about a man on that road now, straight-backed in plain clothes, riding toward a court that did not know what was coming, toward a reckoning he had been building toward for 3 years even when he did not know that was what he was doing. She thought about Hale receiving word that the rider had not been enough. She thought about a council chamber. She thought about 31 pages and 2 witnesses, and a man named Dower in a fishing village north of the court. She thought about the door she had said was not closed. Then she put the earring box back in her bag, and pulled her own coat tighter, and looked at the road ahead. Clara had fallen asleep against her left shoulder, which was 7 months' worth of trust expressed in one unconscious movement. Lyra looked at the gray morning light on the hills. The wagon moved north. She did not look back at the road east. She did not need to. She knew what was on it. She knew the way it moved, straight for the first mile, then bending, then gone. She had traveled enough roads to know that the bend did not mean the end. It just meant you could not see the rest of it from here. That was all right. She could wait. She looked ahead instead, at the circuit road and the morning and the shape of what was next, and she let the wagon carry her toward it with the same complete, settled, entirely self-possessed certainty with which she had stood on a stage for 3 nights and given the crowds everything she had. Her life was hers. It would stay hers. Whatever else it became, that was still being written.